Hi everyone, Dr. Bruno here. In this video, we're going to talk about ethical guidelines in research. We'll start the presentation by reviewing some of the historical examples where human beings have not been treated well in the context of research. We'll then transition and provide the American Psychological Association's guidelines for ethical practice in the context of research, and then wrap everything up by overviewing the policies and procedures that exist at Drexel when it comes to protecting the rights and welfare of human participants. So if you're ready to get started, let's go ahead and dig in. So our textbook highlights two historical examples relative to the ethical treatment of human participants in research. The first here is the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was a medical study conducted in the 1930s on syphilis in black men from Macon County, Alabama. Importantly for this lecture, there were three kinds of ethical violations. The first was that the participants were not treated respectfully. The second is that the participants were harmed. And the third was that the participants were a targeted and disadvantaged social group. We'll go through each of these in turn. First, let's discuss how the participants were not treated respectfully. As a key point, the men were not told whether or not they even had syphilis and were not informed about possible cures that became available during the course of the study. As a second point, the men may have felt coerced to participate in the project because of the generous burial fees that were provided by the researchers to the families. But this was only permissible and paid if the researchers were allowed to humiliate the men posthumously by publishing their findings in academic and scientific writings. And as a third key point, the men were not provided with informed consent for their participation in the project. As a second ethical violation of the human participants in this project, we said that the participants were harmed. In particular, the men were not told about penicillin as a possible treatment option, which would have cured those who were infected. As a second key point, many of the men in the study could not read, and so were unlikely to even learn about penicillin as a possible treatment for their syphilis. And as a third key point, some of the tests that the participant underwent throughout the study were painful and potentially dangerous, as an example, spinal taps. The third ethical consideration with regard to the Tuskegee study was that the group of black men from Macon County, Alabama were absolutely targeted in a disadvantaged social group. The men in the study were often poor, and even though people from all races and all socioeconomic backgrounds in this area were affected by syphilis, the black men were the ones who were targeted for this project. So I think it goes without saying that the Tuskegee syphilis study clearly demonstrated some ethical violations. However, making ethical decisions is not always so clear-cut. Stanley Milgram's studies of obedience to authority, conducted in the 1960s, exemplify how ethical decision-making involves striking a balance. When you watch the videos posted to Blackboard, I want you to ask yourself these three questions. Was it ethical to put teacher participants, pairs, through a stressful experience? 2, were there any lasting effects of the study after the participants had been debriefed, meaning that they were informed that they did not actually shock the learner? Some participants actually reported that even though following the debriefing they understood that they did not actually harm anyone, they still thought about the fact that they were willing to harm somebody after the study commenced. And so balancing the risk to participants with the benefit to society is something that we as researchers really have to contend with. The results of the Milgram studies were surprising in that 65% of the participants obeyed the experimenter and shocked the learner at the highest levels. But after this was found, could the procedures have been adjusted in a way that in order to minimize the participants' anxiety that they were feeling in the moment? So researchers need to take the responsibility and try to strike a balance between conducting research that is ethical while also considering what the research is contributing to society and what we as consumers of that research can learn from it. So it's always this balance, right? What are the risks to the participants versus what is the value of the knowledge that I'm gaining from conducting the research? Now that we've reviewed some of the historical examples of unethical research, let's go ahead and talk about the ethical standards for research. The American Psychological Association has 10 specific ethical standards. Of these, ethical standard number 8 is most relevant for us as researchers here at Drexel. Let's examine the details of the standard. First is the requirement of an institutional review board. These boards are responsible for making sure that research using humans as participants is conducted so ethically. Second is informed consent. The informed consent process is a written explanation of the study which must be read and provided to the subject before agreeing to participate. The best practice is for the participant to sign the form twice, keeping one copy for themselves and giving one copy for the researchers for record keeping. The third is the identification of deception. There are two types of deception: omission, which involves withholding details of the study from participants, and commission, which is deliberate lying to the subjects. Fourth is determining whether a debriefing session is needed, Ethical Standard 8-08. Common in psychological experiments, like the Milgram experiment, whenever researchers are using deception, they must debrief participants following their participation. Debriefing sessions are typically conducted verbally, and the researcher explains why the deception was used and the nature of the deception. Fifth is this concept of research misconduct. Examples of research misconduct include data fabrication, where researchers invent data that fit their hypotheses, and data falsification, where researchers selectively delete observations or influence the participants to act in a particular way. Plagiarism is also a more commonly understood form of research misconduct, where a person represents the words or ideas of others as their own. And so, as mentioned in class, please remember to cite your sources in order to avoid plagiarism. Lastly is with animal research. Some researchers conduct research on non-humans, such as in insects, in primates, or in rodents. And we need to make sure that these animals, too, are treated well and protected from suffering. And so now that we've had the opportunity to review ethical standard number 8, let's now review the Institutional Review Board here at Drexel. At Drexel, the IRB is formed by a committee who generally comprise people from different disciplines, training, and areas of expertise, as well as scientists and non-scientists, to provide broad oversight of the ethical implications of the research. They protect human participants by ensuring the risks to them are minimized, using procedures consistent with sound research design, and do not unnecessarily expose subjects to risk. Before submitting to the IRB, the researchers must follow specific guidelines explicitly stated by the institution. To your right, you can see the Drexel IRB webpage that provides clear instructions and expectations on research obligations, training, and proposal submission. Drexel has different levels of review based on the type of research being conducted. For instance, if there is no risk involved in your research, it doesn't need IRB review at all, but it's up to the IRB to make that decision, not you. If it involves minimal risk, your proposal could get expedited, which means it doesn't need to go through rigorous full board review. Minimal risk is generally considered anything that a person would otherwise experience in their everyday life. If your research is not minimal risk, however, that is, it involves risk or it includes any stress above and beyond what would otherwise be experienced in your everyday life, such as a blood draw or an intense exercise or a new pharmaceutical drug, it would require rigorous full board review, which could take weeks and or months to approve. And so, I hope this video has been helpful. This gives us an overview not only about the ethical considerations and standards in research, highlighted some overview and historical concepts of research himself, but also gives you an idea of what we do here at Drexel. So of course, if there's any questions that members of the class have, I welcome them, and please do not hesitate to contact me, as I'm glad to help in any and every way that I can. Thanks so much for your time and attention, and we'll see you all next class. Take care.